G'day guys and girls, my name's Isahooten and today we're doing some more Terraria comparisons. Wow! That's right, loyal viewers, today we go even more in depth into this awesome game we call Terraria and answer one of the most burning questions of our generation. Which of the expert mode boss items is the best? To bite the bullet and answer this question for you all, I have devised a tier list that I have spent, I kid you not, 87 years, well, no, it's actually just a couple of hours putting it together, but that's just because of my vast Terraria knowledge and expertise. I hope my air quotes were implied there. As you guys surely know, but may need reminding, a Terraria world can be made in either normal or expert mode, where expert mode gives all enemies around double health and damage, and continuously ramps up the difficulty as you make your way through the progression of the game. However, your rewards are much greater in this mode, making this, in my opinion, the best way to play the game. Especially since I'm not a puss. In expert mode, upon defeating a boss, they will drop a treasure bag that contains not only the boss's usual drops from normal mode, which is usually at better drop rates, but also an exclusive expert mode item that is a guaranteed drop, unique to every boss. There are currently 15 obtainable unique expert mode items in the game, with a few treasure bags either having been removed from the game or maybe yet to be implemented. But we'll get to those and speculate about them soon enough. These expert mode items can range from utterly shit to absolutely god tier, but seeing that Terraria is such a diverse game with many different playstyles, it's important to know which of these is best suited to you. Of course, this video is just my opinion, so feel free to share your own thoughts in the comments or leave a poll response at the top right so we can gauge how much you guys actually agree with me. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Firstly, let's start off with the giant blue gelatinous blob we call the King Slime. Now, King Slime will drop the expert mode item called Royal Gel, which, when equipped as an accessory, makes all slimes friendly to you. This means that they won't attack you and they'll basically just act like passive mobs like bunnies or squirrels. And that's about the extent of this item. Honestly, I don't see too much use in this accessory. It's maybe only useful during the slime rain, as none of the slimes will harm you and it's an easy way to clear the event without taking much damage. I kinda just consider this an accessory slot filler until something better comes along, which is usually pretty quickly. This item may have been more powerful or useful if the slimes maybe would attack enemies for you, or that could possibly be overpowered. What do you guys think? So for this reason, I'm going to put the Royal Gel at a solid C tier because it's not completely useless in early game when slimes can be an issue, but it doesn't have much use outside of that. Moving right along, the Shield of Cthulhu is the unique drop for the Eye of Cthulhu in Expert mode. It can deal 30 damage with a dash attack and provides 2 defense to your character, which is extremely useful for new characters. You actually have invulnerability when using this dash attack, and the dashing ability is very useful for survivability if used defensively, as it provides a much needed mobility boost, making it very useful to get out of tight situations. The downside to the Shield of Cthulhu is that your invulnerability during the dash instantly resets after you hit an enemy, so you can be hit right after using it. And also the stats aren't fantastic for later in the game, considering that you can get better items such as the Obsidian Shield and the Tab Eye for a dashing ability later in hard mode. Now I'm going to place the Shield of Cthulhu around a solid A tier because it is extremely useful, I would say most of the way up to hard mode, but is usually replaced by other better accessories after that. Moving on to our next 2 expert mode items. If any of you have seen my Crimson vs Corruption comparison video, you may know that I am already slightly biased towards one of these. The Worm Scarf has the ability to reduce all damage received by your character by 17%. Now, if that doesn't instantly make you cream your jeans, then let me help you get there by giving a little context. The way that Terraria calculates damage received by your character follows this formula. Basically, this says that raw damage received is reduced by 75% of your armor stat, then reduced by a further 17% by the Worm Scarf. One of the strongest attacks in Terraria is the Moon Lord's Laser Eye, which deals around 300 damage in expert mode. This can easily ruin the fight if you get hit by it, even with some of the best armor available to you at that stage, which in my opinion would be the Beetle armor with about 73 defense when using the Shell chestplate. Now, if we don't account for the armor set bonus, this means that 300 damage will be reduced to around 245 damage by only the armor's defense, which is a 55 damage reduction. Not amazing, but not the worst either. If we add the Worm Scarf into the mix, this gets reduced by a further 17%, meaning that 300 damage is reduced to 203 damage received, which is a 97 damage reduction. That's almost a third of the total damage. This could easily be the difference between life and death in this kind of fight, and I honestly cannot think of a situation where you would not need or want this item equipped. And especially seeing that you get it so early on in the game, it'll really help your whole expert mode run. Since this item is so useful and has the potential to be used right up until the end of the game, this is easily a high S tier for me. Now, to snap us back to reality from the godly utility of the Worm Scarf, we reach, oh god, the Brain of Confusion. Of all the early game expert mode items, the Brain of Confusion is definitely at the bottom of the pile. It goes like Worm Scarf, Shield of Cthulhu, then like 50 meters of shit, and then the Brain of Confusion. It's just that bad. It's just not useful, full stop. It has a chance to confuse enemies, which is basically making them walk in the opposite direction of you for a few seconds, not when you hit them, but when they hit you. Of course, this effect can be activated by any form of damage, but it's just bad. This accessory is like less than useless, especially considering lots of bosses and enemies later in the game are immune to confusion anyway. The only possible situation I could even consider this slightly effective is during invasions, or to help from being swarmed by bats and bees when you're underground. So I can't really consider this an F tier, because it can be used in very particular situations, but it's definitely bottom D tier, and I'd like to see you try and convince me otherwise. The next boss that you would most likely encounter is the Queen Bee, and she drops the Hive Pack. The Hive Pack is all about making your friendly bees appear larger and more damaging, which is useful when using items such as bee nades, the beekeeper, the bee gun, the bee's knees, or the honeycomb, which are actually all drops from the Queen Bee herself. The bigger bees deal 1 to 4 extra damage and pierce 3 enemies instead of the normal bee's 1 damage and 2 enemy piercing ability. However, this is where the utility of the Hive Pack ends, as it is only applicable to these weapons. Maybe it's just me, but I never use the bee items for very long. I feel like the Hive Pack is only very useful when you're in early game around the Queen Bee stage, and not much further. Bee nades are very useful crowd control and boss weapons in early game, so it's effective there. Plus, bees are useful for the dungeon, but ultimately it is replaced quite quickly for more useful accessories and weapons. For this reason, I'd have to place it again in a C tier with the Royal Gel, but just slightly higher because I think it has a little bit more utility. Keeping with the trend of underwhelming pre-hard mode expert items, the Bone Glove, which you obtain by defeating Skeletron, is just a bad item. It is the only weapon obtainable as an expert mode item. However, that's really where its uniqueness or specialness ends. With this glove, you basically use bones as ammunition, which is obtained by defeating enemies in the dungeon, and these bones bounce off the walls a few times and can pierce up to 2 enemies before being destroyed. The glove does 11 damage by itself, and the bones do 20 damage, which totals around 31 damage per impact on an enemy, which in expert mode is not at all useful. Since this is one of the few throwing weapons in the game, it receives buffs from the fossil armor and ninja armor, and can be helpful in tight spaces such as underground caves or the dungeon due to its bouncing and piercing. However, its practicality ends very quickly as there are just too many better weapons to choose from.
Boy!
For this reason, I'm gonna put the bone glove into D tier, because it's really only useful at this one section in the game and not much else. Finally, we have reached the bridge between pre-hard mode and hard mode, the Wall of Flesh. The Wall of Flesh in expert mode drops a treasure bag that contains the Demon Heart. And I have to say that this is easily, hands down, the best expert mode item in the game. It permanently gives your character a 6th accessory slot to use in your expert mode world. I mean, need I say more? Not only is it super useful, but its use is very fitting for how you obtain it. It gives you just a much needed boost when entering the daunting hard mode world, especially in expert mode where pretty much anything could kill you if you're not careful. So since this thing just has literally no downsides, I have to place it at the very top of our S tier. The first bosses you will encounter after entering hard mode are the mechanical bosses, the Twins, the Destroyer, and Skeletron Prime. Not necessarily in that order, but that's the way I like to do it anyway. Each of these guys will give you a piece of the mechanical minecart, which can be combined to make the mechanical minecart. The cart itself is the fastest minecart in the game, traveling at around 75 tiles per second after about 4 seconds of acceleration. This is actually 1.5 times the speed of the regular minecart.
I'm fast as fuck, boy! I'm fast as fuck, boy!
Not only that, but it automatically fires lasers at enemies in its path for around 60 damage and provides the player with a defense boost from 2 to 7 defense, depending on how fast you're traveling, which is 2 at a standstill and 7 at top speed. Honestly, there is no downside to having this minecart as a minecart mount, and it's super useful for when you come across naturally spawning minecarts, or if you like to use minecarts to get around your Terraria world. It is also especially useful if you like to use any sort of mine track arena to fight fast-moving bosses like the Moonlord. I couldn't decide whether to put this into the B or C tier, but I eventually decided that B tier is better, as there are literally no downsides to having this minecart equipped to your character, whether you use it frequently or not. Now that we've made the jungle grow restless, we must defeat Plantera, and upon doing so, we receive, in my opinion, a very, very strong expert mode accessory that is definitely one of my personal favorites. The Spore Sac from Plantera rapidly spawns multiple deadly spores around your character that will hone in on nearby enemies and explode on contact. These deal around 400 damage over 1 second, whilst also inflicting the poison debuff for 5 to 11 seconds, which is usually enough to kill most enemies. The explosion is an area of effect, so it can hit more than one enemy at a time as well. These spores can also pass freely through blocks. They will chase down and intercept enemies that perhaps you can't even see or reach, such as angry trappers or wraiths. And whilst they are a little slow, you can have a maximum of 10 of these bad boys on screen at a time, meaning that you are free to go about your business without having to worry about most incoming threats. Especially useful when building or mining, so that you don't have to actively switch weapons or tools and can work in peace. Whilst the spores don't follow your character, they quickly respawn around you when you reach a new area, so there's not much danger in moving away from your protective flock of fungus. This is also an incredibly useful item for AFK farms or for event arenas, as they do a lot of automatic damage that almost acts like a backup gunner for your character if you are occupied elsewhere. I'm placing this in a high A tier above the Shield of Cthulhu because not only is it one of my favorites, but it does an insane amount of damage and does one of the most useful things in the game, I feel, allowing you to play in relative peace, which is particularly advantageous in expert mode. As much as I would like to put this into S tier, it simply isn't an S tier item, due to it having a few downsides such as having to be used around blocks, and also taking a little while to respawn when you move to a different area. Now we move on to our best friend, the big mean orange metal man, the Golem. The Golem drops the Shiny Stone in Expert Mode, which is an accessory that once equipped increases the rate of your health regen slowly over time, but only when you are not moving or using any tools or weapons. This health regen slowly increases from 10 health per second to around 40 health per second over about 35 seconds, but taking any damage, using any items besides fishing poles or health potions, moving, or having the bleeding debuff will reset all of the health regen acceleration. The Shiny Stone also does slightly increase all effects of other healing items and buffs, even when you are moving and or using items. Other than being a knockoff Infinity Stone, the Shiny Stone doesn't really add much to the player unless they are desperately in need of a healing accessory. Even then, it's not the best. It does have a good amount of regen, but so many conditions have to be perfect for this to be effective. Not getting hit, no use of items, standing completely still, and usually this is a recipe for death in Terraria. So I feel this kinda just takes up an accessory slot without adding too much to a good loadout. So I'm gonna put this into C tier, but it is still a high C tier item. Now we move on to Duke Fishron. This is a boss that is honestly forgotten by a lot of Terraria players due to the fact that it is very difficult to summon. Having to catch Truffle Worm can be pretty difficult and they're quite rare. But not only does he have some of the best items in the game, he also has one of the best Expert Mode items in the game, making defeating him in Expert Mode very, very worthwhile. Duke Fishron will drop a treasure bag containing the Shrimpy Truffle, which is used in the character's mount slot to summon a cute Fishron mount that can fly and hover indefinitely. Now the reason that this mount is so useful is that it gets an insane speed boost when it swims in water, and also gives your character a 15% damage boost for around 6 seconds after exiting water. It is very, very useful for boss fights if you're able to set up some water traps in your world to utilize the mount's special ability, or you can use water buckets to pour water over the mount in mid-air, which also triggers the buff. So, due to its crazy movement abilities and combat capabilities, I'd easily put this into the S tier. However, it is at the bottom of the S tier considering that the mount suffers whenever it touches the ground or hits any walls, and there are possibly better mounts available to you, such as the UFO mount, which of course doesn't require expert mode to obtain, it's slightly faster, and can be used in confined spaces. UFO mount, best mount? Now, just before we get to the Moon Lord, I have a couple of special mentions that I'd like to add in, mainly because they're a good source of speculation and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on these. Firstly, the Lunatic Cultist, or the Lunatic Cultist. Anyway, this guy is the only main progression boss that doesn't drop a treasure bag, and the wiki says that it is currently unobtainable. My speculation is that we will possibly see this added into the 1.4 Journey's End update, but I have no clue what his special expert mode item would be. Maybe something that helps you when taking on the pillars or the Moon Lord? Let me know what you guys think would be a good expert mode item for the Cultist, and I'll do a special mention in another video. However, for now, I do have to put this in F tier because, well, you literally can't get it. The boss Betsy in the Old One's Army event does drop a treasure bag in expert mode, but there's no unique expert mode item, and it has the same drop rates as Betsy in normal mode. So expert mode only makes her more difficult without adding any more reward. Again though, it would be cool to have an expert mode item for Betsy too, so let me know what you guys think it should be. But for now, into F tier it goes. to the big boy himself, the Moon Lord. The Moon Lord is quite special in expert mode, as not only does he become insanely more difficult to defeat, but he is much more rewarding, as he gives you 2 unique expert mode items from 1 treasure bag. Having said that though, you would think that the Moon Lord would actually give you some of the best expert mode items, but in actuality, he gives you one of the worst. This accessory allows the holder to toggle the direction of gravity of that character. This does seem all well and good, however, you can only change gravity while standing on a floor or ceiling, basically a solid block, meaning that you can't change gravity direction in midair. This makes it inferior to the gravitation potion because the gravitation potion allows you to change gravity at will, and it's an item that you can get at almost any point in the game pretty easily. Now, I would put this in F tier, but there are very few specific uses, I suppose. It'll be useful in tight spaces like the dungeon, so you can avoid having to go over spikes. But, I mean, you could just mine these anyway. It's potentially helpful in fighting the Dungeon Guardian, but the fish run mount we looked at earlier, the UFO mount, or wings, or a gravitation potion, which are all easier to obtain, would work much better in this situation. So I'm putting the gravity globe at the lowest end of D tier, mainly because it can be kind of fun, even if it's not useful in the slightest. The saving grace for the Moon Lord's expert mode drops, however, is the suspicious looking Tentacle. This is a summon that is used in the light pet slot, which summons a small tentacled eye that provides light and follows your character around. Not only that, but it can sense nearby NPCs, it can sense enemies, treasures such as pots and chests, and it can sense ores from around 15 to 20 blocks away, meaning it is invaluable whenever you go mining. The suspicious looking eye is one of the 2 light pets that provides the most light, the other being the wisp in a bottle. However, the suspicious looking tentacle is generally considered better as it detects treasures and enemies, and it hugs the player most of the time. However, this means it does lack the ability to move around the screen like the wisp. One thing that I did notice while making this video, however, is that the suspicious looking tentacle is the only expert mode item that doesn't have a rainbow rarity. I mean, does this mean that it's not a true expert mode item? I mean, you can only get it in expert mode. Terraria developers, Relogic, please explain. The people need answers. I'd have to place it high in the A tier, as it is definitely the best helper pet in the game. It's a high-ranking status symbol to your friends in multiplayer, and definitely has an element of badassery to it. I mean, does this not look badass to you? The only reason it isn't in S tier is just because you receive it so late in the game, and by this stage you don't really need it, but it is still very useful. Well, that and the tooltip is oddly sexual, don't you think? Maybe I just have a horribly dirty mind. I mean, that's probably the more likely explanation. Well, guys and girls, thank you so much for watching this tier list on the expert mode boss items. Let me know if you guys agree or if you disagree, which will probably be most of you, but you can let me know by participating in the poll to the top right. Also, let me know any interesting uses that you have for these items that I may not have thought of in the comments. And I'll do a special mention, of course, to those speculations about the Lunatic Lunatic Cultist, and the Betsy treasure bags as well in another upcoming video. Thanks very much, guys. My name's Isahooten, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Change the world. My final message. Goodbye.